In the vastness of space, amidst the stars and the black void, a single signal echoed through the quiet. It wasn't loud, nor was it powerful, but it carried a desperation so strong that it cut through the silence like a knife. It was faint, barely detectable, but the message it carried was clear. Help was needed. The signal came from a small, almost forgotten planet, tucked away in a far corner of the galaxy. The planet, known as Zorath, was once a thriving colony, its people living in peace. However, for years now, it had been under attack by an unknown force. The invaders were ruthless, relentless, and overwhelming in number. The people of Zorath had done everything they could to fight back, but it was never enough. Now, they were on the brink of annihilation. This was their last chance, their final plea for help. The signal was brief but chilling. It spoke of cities falling, of lives lost, and of an enemy too powerful to defeat. But it wasn't just a cry of despair. It was a call for action, an invitation to the strongest warriors in the galaxy to answer. And who would answer such a call? Only one group in the galaxy could respond with the force and fury needed to stand against such overwhelming odds: the Deathworlders. These warriors were the stuff of legends. Their strength, their skill, and their ruthless efficiency in battle were unmatched by any other species in the galaxy. They had no equal. But they were not a race to be easily summoned. They lived in isolation, far from the wars of the galaxy, and it took something extraordinary to draw them out of their secluded lives. When the signal reached the farthest reaches of space, the Deathworlders were far from the front lines. Their homeworld, a desolate planet known as Drullan 6, was a place of constant chaos and violence, a land where only the strongest could survive. But the Deathworlders were not merely survivors. They were hunters, conquerors, and warriors. They had faced every kind of threat the galaxy could throw at them, and they had always emerged victorious. Captain Alara Drax was the leader of one such group. She was known for her cold, calculating mind and her unmatched skill in combat. Under her command, the Deathworlders had never lost a battle. Her crew, a tight-knit group of warriors, were equally feared throughout the galaxy. They had faced alien empires, monstrous beasts, and even ancient gods, but the call from Zorath was different. This wasn't just a call for help, it was a test. As the signal crackled through the communication systems of the Deathworlder ship, Captain Drax stood at the bridge, her face as hard as stone. The crew behind her remained silent, waiting for her decision. They knew the risks. Responding to this distress signal would mean leaving the safety of their homeworld, diving into the unknown, and possibly facing an enemy far beyond anything they had ever encountered. But there was no hesitation in Alara's voice when she spoke. "We answer it," she said simply, her gaze never leaving the screen. "This is what we were born for." Her words were met with a murmur of agreement from the crew. They were warriors. They lived for battle, for the challenge, for the thrill of proving that no one was stronger than the Deathworlders. This call, desperate and filled with fear, was a challenge they could not ignore. The decision was made, and the ship's engines roared to life as they set course for Zorath. As they left the familiar territories of their homeworld behind, the crew couldn't help but wonder what awaited them on the distant planet. The enemy on Zorath had been described as ruthless, but no one could be sure of what they were truly up against. As they traveled through space, the crew was silent, each warrior lost in their own thoughts. They all knew what it meant to be a Deathworlder. It meant that they were strong, stronger than any other species. They had never lost a fight, and they didn't intend to start now. The planet Zorath grew closer with each passing minute. It was a small world, with sprawling cities and vast oceans, but it was a world under siege. The sky above it was darkened with smoke from the burning cities, and the ground below trembled with the sound of distant explosions. The planet's once beautiful landscapes were now scared and ravaged by war. As the Deathworlder ship descended into the atmosphere, Captain Drax could feel the tension in the air. This was no ordinary battle. The planet was not just under siege. It was fighting for survival. And in the vast expanse of the galaxy, there were few who could survive such a battle. Alara stood at the front of the ship, her eyes focused on the planet below. She could already feel the anger building within her. She could feel the call of battle in her blood. The Deathworlders were not just warriors. They were hunters, and they had been called to hunt. As the ship prepared to land, Alara's voice echoed through the comms. "Get ready, everyone. The time for waiting is over. We're about to show the galaxy what it means to face the wrath of the Deathworlders." The crew nodded in silent agreement. They were ready. They would not fail. They would answer the call, and they would fight to the last breath if necessary. This was their purpose, their destiny. The signal had been heard. The Deathworlders were coming. And when they arrived, the galaxy would remember the name of Zorath 4, and they would remember the wrath of the Deathworlders. The Deathworlder ship hurtled toward the surface of Zorath 4, its engines roaring as it cut through the atmosphere. Alara Drax stood in front of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the planet below. Every part of her being was focused on the battle that lay ahead. The crew behind her was equally silent, their eyes filled with the same burning determination. The ship touched down on the war-torn surface of Zorath 4 with a soft thud. The ground shook as the powerful engines powered down, leaving a silence that hung heavily in the air. Outside, the sky was a dull orange, thick with smoke from the burning cities. The smell of burning metal and the acrid scent of destruction filled the air. The people of Zorath 4 had fought hard, but their enemy had proven relentless. Captain Drax turned to face her crew, her expression cold and focused. "Listen up, everyone. We didn't come here to make friends. We came here to win, and we will." The warriors nodded in unison, their faces a mixture of calm resolve and quiet eagerness. They were ready. They had fought wars across the galaxy, but this was different. Zorath 4 was on the edge of collapse, and the invaders who had laid siege to the planet were unlike any they had ever faced before. The Deathworlders didn't know who they were up against, but they didn't need to. They only needed to know one thing. This enemy would not survive the wrath of the Deathworlders. The hatch opened with a hiss, and the cool, smoky air of Zorath 4 filled the ship. The warriors stepped out one by one, weapons in hand, ready to face whatever threat awaited them. Alara led the charge, her boots hitting the ground with a soft, deliberate thud. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in the devastation. The city was in ruins, its once proud towers now reduced to rubble, its streets littered with debris. The signal they had received had been clear. The people of Zorath 4 were desperate. But what the Deathworlders didn't know was who or what had caused the destruction. They didn't know how fierce the enemy was. But they knew one thing. There was no turning back now. They had been summoned, and they would see this battle through to the end. Alara turned to the rest of her team. "Spread out. We need to assess the situation. Keep your eyes open. We don't know what we're dealing with." The warriors nodded and moved quickly, disappearing into the smoke-filled streets. Alara remained where she stood, scanning the skyline with sharp, focused eyes. The air was thick with the sound of distant explosions and the screams of battle. This was a world in chaos, and the Deathworlders had just arrived to throw it into even more chaos. As Alara advanced deeper into the city, her comms device crackled to life. A voice, distorted by static, came through. "Captain Drax, this is Colonel Vora from the Zorath 4 Resistance. We need to talk." Alara paused, her hand instinctively reaching for her communication device. She hadn't expected to hear from the Resistance so soon. The message was clear. The planet's survivors needed help, and they needed it urgently. "Go ahead, Colonel," Alara responded. "The invaders are unlike anything we've ever seen." Colonel Vora's voice was strained. "They move like shadows, disappearing and reappearing with terrifying speed. Our weapons have barely been able to slow them down. We've lost entire battalions. We need your help now, or this planet will fall." Alara clenched her jaw. It sounded worse than she had anticipated, but it only hardened her resolve. The Deathworlders were not here to fail. They never had. Understood, Alara said calmly. We'll find you. Hold on as long as you can. She ended the transmission and turned to her crew. We've got work to do. Stay sharp. As they advanced through the city, the atmosphere grew heavier. The sound of distant gunfire echoed in the distance. From behind crumbling buildings and destroyed streets, the first sign of the enemy appeared. Figures cloaked in dark, shifting armor moved silently across the landscape. They didn't seem human, and they didn't seem to care about the destruction around them. They were here to conquer. Alara's pulse quickened. Her instincts as a leader kicked in. These were no ordinary invaders. Their speed, their ability to disappear and reappear in the smoke, made them even more dangerous than she had imagined. They weren't just invaders. They were hunters, just like the Deathworlders. And that meant one thing. They were about to face an enemy just as ruthless and relentless as themselves. Move, Alara shouted to her crew, motioning for them to spread out. Don't let them surround you. The warriors immediately followed her orders, their movements fluid and precise. As they approached a ruined building, a group of the invaders emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They charged forward, weapons flashing in the dim light, slashing through the air with deadly precision. The battle had begun. Alara led the charge, her blade cutting through the air as she took down the first enemy with a swift, efficient strike. Her crew followed suit, moving with deadly grace. There was no fear in their eyes, only the thrill of combat, the joy of battle. For the Deathworlders, this was the moment they lived for. But even as they fought, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was only the beginning. Whoever these invaders were, they had just shown their hand. And the Deathworlders would make them regret ever stepping foot on Zorath 4. The planet would burn, but it wouldn't fall. Not while the Deathworlders were there. The invaders were about to learn a valuable lesson. Humanity's wrath was a force that could never be underestimated. The battle raged on in the streets of Zorath 4. Alara Drax and her warriors pressed forward, cutting through the invaders like a relentless storm. But no matter how many enemies they struck down, there always seemed to be more. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, birthing new enemies with each passing moment. Alara's mind raced as she adjusted her strategy, knowing that they couldn't keep this up forever. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden explosion to her left, sending debris scattering through the air. She ducked instinctively, rolling to the side to avoid a piece of twisted metal that came dangerously close. Looking up, she saw more figures emerging from the smoke, their glowing eyes reflecting the fires that were now consuming the ruined city. These invaders moved like shadows, quick, silent, and deadly. "Captain," one of her warriors shouted, pointing towards a building in the distance. "We've got company, more of them, and they're heavily armed." Alara's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, locking onto the new threat. The invaders weren't just soldiers, they were more organized than that. They were setting up something, a trap, perhaps, or a defensive perimeter. Alara's gut twisted. This was no longer a simple raid. Something much larger was at play. "Fall back," she ordered. "Regroup and head for the western sector. We need to see what they're planning." Her warriors moved swiftly, adjusting to her command. They had been trained for moments like this, moments when the odds were stacked against them. But even as they retreated, Alara's instincts told her that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just their enemy's skill and speed. There was something else, a deeper, more sinister force at work. As they regrouped in the western sector of the city, Alara's communicator buzzed. The voice on the other end was familiar, but strained with urgency. "Captain Drax, this is Colonel Vora. We've encountered something strange. These invaders, they're not human. I mean, they look human, but there's something off about them. Their movements, their behavior, it's like they're not fully alive." Alara's heart skipped a beat. Not fully alive. she repeated, her voice cold. Yes, Vora confirmed. There, some of them are more machine than man. We found several bodies that aren't just enhanced. They're entirely synthetic. It's like they've been made, not born. A chill ran down Alara's spine. Synthetic soldiers. It made sense. After all, if the invaders were technologically advanced enough to launch an assault of this magnitude, they would have the means to create something beyond human capability. But the implications were terrifying. If they were dealing with an army of synthetic warriors, there was no telling what kind of technology they were up against. I'm heading to your location, Alara said, her voice resolute. Prepare for reinforcements. The warriors began moving out, their footsteps heavy on the charred ground. As they approached the coordinates where Colonel Vora had reported the strange activity, Alara noticed something new. There was a change in the air, a growing tension. The smoke that hung over the city seemed thicker now, and the fires burned with an unnatural glow. It was as if the very planet itself was reacting to the presence of these invaders. When they arrived at the site, the scene was even worse than Alara had feared. The bodies of several invaders lay sprawled across the street, but there was no blood. No wounds, just strange, hollow shapes where their bodies should have been. They looked like mannequins, but their eyes, those eyes were still glowing with a cold, eerie light. Gods above, one of the warriors whispered, a trace of fear creeping into his voice. Alara didn't hesitate. She moved quickly to inspect the nearest body, crouching down beside it. Her fingers touched the synthetic skin, which felt cold and unnaturally smooth. She pulled back, her mind working overtime to process the information. They're not fully alive, but they're not dead either, she muttered. These things, these soldiers, they'd been engineered for war, and we've walked right into the middle of it. Captain, you need to see this. Colonel Vora's voice crackled through the comms again. We've found something that might explain all of this. Alara's pulse quickened. What is it, Colonel? Come to the Central Command Center. It's a weapon, Captain. A weapon we didn't know existed. The word weapon echoed in Alara's mind. She turned to her warriors, her expression hardening. We're moving out. Stay alert. As they made their way through the city, the tension in the air grew thicker. Every corner they turned, every building they passed, felt like an opportunity for an ambush. The invaders were still out there, watching, waiting. Alara had no illusions. They were being hunted. When they finally arrived at the Central Command Center, the sight that greeted them was far beyond anything Alara had imagined. The building was a fortress, its doors reinforced with technology that only the most advanced civilizations could afford. Inside, the walls were lined with monitors displaying data, much of it in languages Alara had never seen before. And at the center of it all, there was a large cylindrical structure humming with energy. This, Colonel Vora said, his voice filled with awe, is what they've been building. A weapon powerful enough to wipe out entire worlds. Alara's eyes narrowed as she took in the massive machine before her. It was like nothing she had ever seen, and yet she knew without a doubt it was the key to everything. The invaders hadn't just come to conquer Zorath 4. They had come for this weapon. And now, with this weapon in their grasp, humanity was about to unleash its wrath. Let's get to work, Alara said, her voice filled with a new sense of purpose. We'll make sure they regret ever stepping foot in this galaxy. The cold hum of the weapon's core filled the room, vibrating through the floor beneath Alara's boots. It was a sound of power, of something ancient and untamed, a force waiting to be unleashed. She stood at the center of the command center, staring at the massive cylindrical structure that hummed with terrifying energy. Around her, the team of warriors was tense, waiting for her next command. Alara's eyes never left the machine. She could feel the weight of it, the weight of what it could do. They had learned quickly that this weapon wasn't just a tool. It was a creation designed to obliterate entire worlds. The invaders weren't just after Zorath 4. They had come for something much greater, something that could change the course of the galaxy forever. "We need to find out what it does," Alara muttered under her breath. Colonel Vora stood next to her, his expression grim. "We already know what it does. It's not just a weapon. It's a weapon of mass destruction, capable of wiping out entire planets. It was built by a race so advanced that we can barely comprehend their technology. How long until they can activate it?" Alara's voice was steady, though inside, her heart was racing. "Minutes," Vora answered. "If we don't stop them now, it's over for all of us." Alara clenched her fists. There was no time for hesitation. They had to act quickly, decisively. She turned to her warriors, who stood at the ready, waiting for her signal. "We move in fast," she ordered. "Disable the weapon, and do not let anyone or anything stop us." Her team nodded in unison. Alara knew the stakes. The weapon could be activated at any moment, and if they failed, the entire galaxy would fall. Her thoughts flashed back to the desperate cry for help that had sparked this war. The invaders had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they were about to learn just how far humanity would go to protect its own. The warriors advanced, moving with calculated precision as they surrounded the cylindrical machine. It stood tall, glowing faintly, its surface covered in strange symbols and intricate designs. It was beyond anything they had seen before, an alien technology so foreign that even their best engineers struggled to understand it. One of the warriors, a tech specialist named Garrick, stepped forward cautiously, his fingers grazing the surface of the machine. The moment his hand made contact, the hum grew louder, and the symbols on the weapon seemed to shift. "It's reacting to us," Garrick said, his voice filled with awe and unease. "It's alive in some way. This isn't just a machine. It's a living weapon." "Living?" Alara asked, her brow furrowing. "Explain." Garrick didn't look up from his task. "It's like it's made of organic and mechanical parts, somehow fused together. It responds to touch, to commands. We might be able to interface with it." Vora moved to stand beside Alara, his expression uncertain. "We don't know what we're dealing with here, Captain. What if interfacing with it makes things worse?" "We have no choice," Alara said, her voice firm. "If we don't try, we won't have a chance to stop it. We either control it or destroy it." The tension in the room thickened. Every moment was a risk, and with each passing second, the threat of the weapon being activated grew. Garrick continued to work, his hands moving over the alien surface with an intensity that suggested he knew the clock was ticking. Suddenly, there was a sharp mechanical sound, a click. A low voice, distorted and robotic, came from the center of the machine. "Initiating launch sequence." The words were enough to freeze everyone in place. A cold rush of fear swept through Alara. They had failed. The weapon was activating. "No," Garrick shouted, pulling his hand back as the machine began to glow brighter, the symbols flashing faster. "It's too late. It's starting up." Without a second to waste, Alara grabbed Garrick's arm and pulled him away. "Get back. We need to stop this, now." The warriors scrambled, trying to assess the situation. They had to disable the weapon before it reached full power, or it would be too late. Alara's mind raced. They couldn't destroy it. It was too advanced, and their weapons wouldn't even scratch its surface. But perhaps they didn't need to destroy it. Alara turned to Vora. "We need to shut it down, not destroy it. Find a way to override its systems." Vora nodded sharply, quickly moving to the central console, which was embedded deep into the machine. The glowing symbols on the weapon had grown more intense, as if the weapon was awakening, fully aware of the threat humanity posed. But this was not just a weapon. It was an extension of the invaders themselves. If they could take control of it, they could turn the tide of this battle. As Vora typed rapidly on the console, the room seemed to shake with the weapon's growing power. A loud roar echoed from the machine, and the walls of the command center trembled. Alara's team held their ground. the weight of the situation bearing down on them. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. "Come on," Elara muttered under her breath, her heart pounding. She watched as Vora worked tirelessly to override the system, sweat dripping down his face. "Hurry." And then, with a sharp beep, the machine seemed to freeze. "It's done," Vora said, his voice filled with relief. "I've locked it down. The launch sequence is halted. For now." Elara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The immediate danger had passed, but they knew it wasn't over. The invaders would be back, and this weapon would be at the center of everything. "We've stopped it," Elara said, her voice steady, though her mind was already thinking of the next battle. "But we can't let our guard down." "Not yet." Her team nodded, knowing that their fight was far from over. This was just the beginning. The wrath of humanity had been unleashed, but the true test of their strength was still ahead. The invaders had come for war, and humanity would give it to them. The tension in the command center was palpable. They had stopped the weapon, but the feeling of dread lingered, thick as the air in the room. Elara stood by the window, staring out into the cold expanse of space. The enemy fleet loomed in the distance, an ominous dark cloud against the stars. But it was not the sight of the fleet that filled her with dread. It was the realization that the battle was far from over. The invaders were ruthless, and they would not simply retreat because a single weapon had been neutralized. They had come to Zorath 4 with an agenda, and the failure of one weapon would only motivate them to bring something worse. "Captain," Colonel Vora's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've received another transmission. It's from the fleet." Elara turned, walking over to the communications console. The face on the screen was one she knew all too well. It was the enemy commander, a tall, imposing figure with red skin and eyes that seemed to glow with malice. The commander's lips curled into a sneer as he spoke. "Humanity," he spat. "You think you've won, but this is just the beginning. The weapon you've shut down was nothing more than a distraction. We have more. Much more." Alara's jaw tightened. She had suspected as much. The weapon they had deactivated was only one piece of a larger plan. The enemy had known the risks. They had expected humanity to fight back. But what they hadn't expected was how far humanity was willing to go to protect its own. "You'll regret underestimating us," Elara said, her voice cold, unwavering. "We're not the weak race you thought we were." The enemy commander's eyes narrowed, and for a moment there was a flicker of doubt in his expression. "I doubt it. You won't survive what's coming next." With a final sneer, the transmission ended, leaving Elara and her team in tense silence. The threat was real, and the enemy's words were chilling. But Elara knew one thing: humanity had always been underestimated. And now it was time to show the galaxy why. "We need to prepare," Elara said, turning to Vora. "What do we have?" Vora quickly moved to the large map of the galaxy projected in the center of the room. "We've identified several enemy fleets that are closing in on key locations. Their next move will be to strike at our core systems. If we don't act fast, we'll lose everything." Alara's mind raced. The stakes had just gotten much higher. The invaders weren't just after Zorath 4. They were after all of humanity. And they had to stop them, no matter the cost. "Gather the fleet," she ordered. "We're going to hit them before they have a chance to regroup. I want every ship on the move. We don't have the luxury of waiting for their next move." The team moved quickly, springing into action. There was no time to waste. Every second that passed made their enemies stronger, and Elara knew they had to strike first. The element of surprise was their best weapon. As the fleet prepared for battle, Elara stood at the front, her eyes scanning the faces of the warriors who stood with her. They were ready. They had fought for their homes, their families, and now they were ready to fight for their future. She turned to her first officer, Lieutenant Zara. "Are we ready?" Zara nodded, her face set in determination. "The fleet is assembled and ready for action, Captain. All systems are operational. Alara gave a sharp nod. Good. Let's make sure they know they've made a mistake. The ship engines hummed to life, the entire fleet beginning to move as one massive force. Alara watched as the ships slowly aligned in formation, a sight that filled her with both pride and dread. This was it, the beginning of the end for the invaders. The comm system crackled as Vora's voice echoed across the fleet. All ships, prepare for warp jump. We're heading straight into the heart of enemy territory. No hesitation, no mercy. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. They were taking the fight to the enemy, no longer waiting for them to strike first. Humanity was going to show the galaxy its true power. As the fleet leaped into warp space, Alara's thoughts turned to the crew, to the warriors who had fought alongside her. They had been through so much already, facing unimaginable odds, fighting against a force that seemed unstoppable. But now, they had something that their enemies didn't, the full wrath of humanity. The enemy would never know what hit them. In the heart of space, with the darkness of the unknown ahead, the fleet of humanity moved forward with purpose. They had one goal: to end the invasion before it could spread any further. The invaders had called humanity weak. But now, they were about to witness a side of humanity they would never forget. As the fleet hurtled toward the enemy, Alara felt a deep sense of resolve. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their future, a fight to protect everything they held dear. And they would win. The fleet surged through the cold void of space, the distant stars barely visible against the darkness surrounding them. Alara stood on the command deck, watching as the enemy's forces slowly came into view. The tension was thick in the air. The battle was about to begin, and every ship in the fleet was prepared for the fight of their lives. The enemy ships were massive, far larger than any of the human vessels, but Alara had no doubts in her mind. The invaders had underestimated humanity before, and now it was time to show them the true strength of a species that would not back down. All units, prepare for combat. Vora's voice echoed through the deck. This is our moment. We're taking the fight to them. Alara's fingers tightened around the console as she issued the order for the fleet to move into position. Her thoughts raced. There was no turning back now. The enemy fleet was gathering in front of them, a wall of death just waiting to crush them. But Alara was ready. Humanity had always been able to adapt, to find strength even in the face of overwhelming odds. Today would be no different. Commander, the enemy is locking onto us. They've already launched their first wave of ships, Zara reported from her station, her voice steady despite the rising chaos. Brace for impact. Alara ordered, her voice calm, but inside, she could feel the adrenaline starting to build. The first wave of enemy fighters closed in on them like a swarm of locusts, their sharp edges glinting menacingly under the dim lights of space. Firing. Target their lead ship, Alara commanded. The fleet responded instantly. Energy beams lit up the darkness as the human ships opened fire. The enemy responded in kind, launching barrages of energy missiles at the approaching fleet. The space around them erupted in flashes of bright light, the intensity of the battle unfolding before them. Alara's eyes stayed focused on the battlefield, tracking every movement, every maneuver. The enemy's ships were powerful, but humanity's fleet had something they didn't: determination. The human ships were faster, more agile, and their crews were trained to adapt quickly. They had no intention of fighting a battle on the defensive. Enemy ship down. Vora shouted, a note of triumph in his voice. Keep it up. We've got this, Alara called back. The battle raged on as the two fleets collided, each side refusing to give an inch. Human fighters weaved in and out of enemy formations, dodging blasts while returning fire. Their ships were small, but their pilots were skilled, able to outmaneuver their enemies in ways the invaders hadn't anticipated. The larger enemy ships the enemy fleet fell into disarray. The loss of their flagship had shaken their resolve, and now the remaining ships were vulnerable. The human fleet pressed their advantage, breaking through the enemy lines with precision and power. Each strike was calculated, each movement deliberate. Humanity had turned the tide, and there was no stopping them now. But even as the battle raged on, Alara knew they couldn't afford to relax. There was still work to be done. They had struck a blow, but the enemy was far from defeated. The war was still far from over. Yet, as she watched the last remnants of the enemy fleet retreat into the darkness, Alara felt a sense of victory swelling in her chest. They had done it. Humanity had fought back, and it had won. But the real test would come next. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's wrath, and they would never forget it. As the last of the enemy ships disappeared into the vastness of space, a heavy silence settled over the battlefield. The victorious human fleet hovered, its engines still humming softly, as the debris from the shattered alien ships drifted in the void. There was no music of triumph, no celebration. Instead, the weight of the victory hung heavily in the air. It wasn't just the cost of the battle that weighed on Alara's mind. It was what had been left behind. "Commander, the fleet is reporting heavy damage." Zara's voice broke through the silence. "We've lost over 30 ships, and many of our fighters are in need of urgent repairs." Alara nodded solemnly, her gaze fixed on the stars in front of her. "I know," she said quietly, feeling the burn of loss in her chest. "But we didn't just win a battle. We won our future." The human fleet had fought with everything they had. It wasn't just technology, strategy, or firepower that had secured their victory. It was the unwavering resolve of the people who had fought for their homes, their families, and their very existence. And though they had emerged victorious, they had paid a heavy price. "We didn't just defend our home," Alara continued, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We sent a message. The galaxy won't forget what happened here today. Humanity is no longer a race to be ignored, to be pushed aside. We are a force to be reckoned with." But as the reality of the aftermath sank in, Alara couldn't help but reflect on the true cost of the victory. The crew members who wouldn't be coming back, the families who would never see their loved ones again, and the lives lost in the desperate battle for survival. Their sacrifices would never be forgotten, but it was a bitter truth that they had paid the price for humanity's vengeance. "All enemy ships are gone," Vora reported, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "But the damage to our fleet is significant. It will take us weeks, if not months, to fully recover." "We'll rebuild," Alara said firmly. "We've rebuilt before, and we'll do it again. The galaxy now knows what happens when they push us too far. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something much greater." As Alara looked out at the vast expanse of space, she knew that the victory, while hard-earned, was just the start of humanity's journey. The galaxy was a vast, unforgiving place, and this battle, though monumental, was only one chapter in an ongoing story. "Commander, we're receiving a message from the Council," Zara reported, breaking her train of thought. "It's urgent." Alara nodded, turning toward the comm station. The war had just ended, but the aftermath had only just begun. It was time to face the consequences of their actions. "Put it through," Alara ordered. The face that appeared on the screen was that of a stern-looking man in the robes of the Galactic Council. His expression was grave, his eyes scanning the damage on the battlefield. "Commander Alara, humanity's actions today have changed the course of this war," the man said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his position. "We've received reports from other systems, and there is concern." Alara didn't flinch. "Concern?" she asked, her voice steady. "We did what was necessary to protect ourselves. The galaxy will learn that there are consequences when humanity is pushed to the brink." The councilman's eyes narrowed. "We're not questioning your right to defend your people, but the power you've demonstrated, your ability to strike back with such force, has caused alarm. There are systems that are now questioning the balance of power. You've shown them that humanity is a force unlike any other. That kind of power will not go unnoticed." Alara remained silent for a moment, the weight of the councilman's words settling in. She understood what he was saying. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had just taken its first step into a much larger universe. "We will not be silenced," Alara said, her voice unwavering. "Humanity has a right to defend itself, and we've earned our place in this galaxy. If the rest of the universe can't accept that, then we'll show them why they should." The councilman's expression softened slightly. "I will relay your message to the rest of the council. But be warned, Commander, your victory may have made you a target. Many systems will not take kindly to your rise." "I don't care what they think," Alara replied, her resolve hardening. "We will not be cowed by fear or threats. Humanity is stronger than they realize, and we'll fight for our place, no matter what." The call ended, leaving Alara standing alone in the quiet command center. The weight of the galaxy was now on her shoulders, and she knew that the real fight had only just begun. The human fleet, though battered and scarred, was a symbol of strength, unity, and unyielding determination. But their victory had come at a cost, and the galaxy would soon realize that humanity's wrath was not something to be underestimated. The message had been sent, but Alara knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter in the long, uncertain future. Humanity had been pushed to the edge, and now the galaxy would see just how far they were willing to go to protect what was theirs. The war had ended, but the true battle for survival was only beginning.